become industrial process of making many more new players that is qualified to be in the finals.
When you say team, do you say team with franchise league, or you say the team because you have in China several pretty great teams which are not focused mainly on franchise leagues?
It's mainly franchise.
Okay. So, you know, you have a bunch of gamers who tend to be, you know, maybe not the most photogenic people in the world, maybe not the most physically fit people in the world, yet you're seeing brands wanting to hang hats on players. What sort of demands do you place on team players now in Asia, the US, Europe, and how do you see that changing? I mean, I think, for context, for example, you know, you think about when MTV started, right? And most musicians were good musicians, but they couldn't really dance and they weren't good looking. And then you move ahead, you know, to the Britney Spears era or the Taylor Swift era, and they're just like amazing at everything and photo model looks and all this sort of thing. How do you see that? How do you see these people being marketable as media people beyond kind of the core gamer?
This kick off in short. I think for the players itself, they're not really talkative and they're not really passionate in anything other than esports. So in our platform, we have plenty of esports professional players who's doing streaming daily on a daily basis, which is engaging the fans on millions of viewership every night. So I think the booming of the game streaming platforms and also short video platform is also helpful for marketing itself because they can showcase their talent and they can also talk to their friends through the streaming platforms.
So does that mean you see the gamers becoming more social, more engaged, or are they outsourcing that to like the support team?
So you don't have to be the top one player to be sociable. So the funny thing is the most popular player is not the top players in China League, but they are always the person who has outstanding personalities, and they always talk directly to their audience. So they know their audience, they know what is the catchy phrase for them to be happy. So this is the thing in China.
I mean, look. I think there's a couple different things happening. One is part of the reason this whole. I mean, this is the population, right? The market side we're talking about here is everybody, right? And so I think you're actually seeing a pretty reasonable reflection, sort of like of that, right? So, but that's kind of one thing. Maybe not kind of like the pure marketing traditional angle, but that's one thing. And I think it's perfectly acceptable. The other thing is it's changing, right? I mean, I've been doing this only a couple of years. I mean, it's like the first year maybe it's a little more like what you described, and in the second year they got a little bit of the David Beckham cut going on, and now they're showing up in year 3 with the sleeve tattoos and the whole thing, and they're in the gym. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, it comes with the spotlight, right? And they see the opportunity associated with it. I mean, they're also balancing that out with practicing, 10, 12 hours a day. I mean, really, it's amazing the commitment to all this. But we have, we talk about this like it's been around a long time, Like this is really, like you said, I mean, this is NFL day one. I mean, think about the opportunity there, give it a second to unfold, thoughtful people, thoughtful structures, really, you have the viewership, you have the distribution, the hard part's done. So to me, it's really early. Sorry, one other thing, just going back to the China comment about the league and the viewership. One, the games are expensive. And in China, you could say, like, that's not the norm, right? League of Legends is a free game. Overwatch is $65. Maybe something will happen with that in the future and kind of change some of those dynamics, right? But in these leagues in particular, right, it's not like the League of Legends. I mean, it's not like China's on an island with LFL and everybody else is kind of picking up scraps, right? It's all one ecosystem, right? 20 teams in it. All part China's a material part of this league and what we're doing, right? We got Billy Netties streaming this stuff, Twitch everywhere else, right? But it's very thoughtfully constructed.
Yeah, and I would like actually to tackle a bit different angle of this topic, and the topic the was following that right now a lot of changes in marketing, this influencers, bloggers, and one of the, let's say, Direct example is Victoria's Secret losing the potential market share just because they don't really like the plus size models and they're going the let's say the traditional for them angle. So I think that what is happening now, it's opening that people who are not talkative or like esports nerds, you might say. I mean, the majority of esports audience are the same, so they want to see in advertisement the people as they are, and not like shining, glorified someone from the picture of the event.
All right, guys. So, one question, and then Eric Vance takes it over. Drew, question to you. What is needed? What is?
So, what is needed for direct-to-consumer infrastructure to be built or whatever done, so that you guys as influencers can actually sell to, the moms or Generation Z directly? I don't know to who you sell, but is there a future for that, or that's just an absurd idea?
What do you mean? Just be a little more specific.
Okay, Navi, Fever Peoples, for, I don't know, Generation Z millennials in Ukraine, or OG chips. I don't know what that would be. Hot dogs, whatever the Generation Z eats, right? But why? I mean, you influence them, but you don't monetize them. Like, why the fuck?
Well, I mean, again, look, to me, it's just old and new. I mean, we're focused on this. You know what I mean? I'm not. My business today, we.
But when? The question is when. Like, we all see it, kind of, right? In a way, maybe, right? So it's a future for advertising, and it's a future for consumers, direct to consumers. You guys influence them. I mean, they use ad blockers. 65%. Facebook, Google does not see them, right? Traditional media does not know about them. They are in your world, but you don't sell to them.
Yeah, but at the same time, I would say that traditional sports grew up, and then advertising and branding was laid on top of it. Whereas streaming and esports have grown up hand in hand with, Razer or with, Monster or Red Bull, or these sorts of brands became part of it. And I did this research project, and 65% of esports players have a positive view of brands that are kind of seen as supporting their lifestyle, right? So I think that's a big difference. Number two, which I think is super interesting, is that, I love playing basketball, but I'm a middle-aged guy, and I'm not going to go out and be playing in a basketball. I tried that a few years ago, and some guy pushed me, and I rolled my ankle, and I was on crutches for 2 months. I'm like, no, never again. That being said, 55% of the people who watch esports play and can follow along. So older dudes like us can still be playing. Obviously, Michael's in great shape and he still plays football out there with the best of them, but give him a few years. But in esports, you can still be engaged. So I think there's another issue there, which is, as a passive consumer, just watch, like you sit on your ass, the football or baseball or whatever you watch, you're sitting on your butt watching something. Whereas in esports, over half the audience is engaged, and I think there's a lot more value to that. So I think since they've grown up with that culture, it's not foreign. They don't, unless you have something like, we're gonna, try and sell perfume, something that doesn't kind of fit. But most of the things I've seen, at least, have seemed kind of contextual. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's also live broadcast, right? So, no sort of ad block, for that. I think people are happy to kind of watch live, right? So that's a different thing. But I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the connection between, you go to an NBA game, you're not spinning around and going shoot hoops at home, right? I mean, this is really, really connected, like you say, right? So there's this kind of
Drew, can you use the microphone?
tip tricks type of thing.
Use the microphone, yeah.
That's just on his point about connection, right? It's a deeper connection because people are looking at this like class. They look at this like I'm going to go and beat all my friends the minute I finish up here. So it's kind of like a tips, tricks, things, very direct engagement. And then someone mentioned on an earlier panel too, I think there was an article today in TechCrunch, right? It's not just a couple schools in LA, it's 13,000 high schools in the US are now going to have, junior varsity programs for esports, right? Starting with Fortnite, right? Everyone else will follow. But this is like, instead of football practice, getting your head kicked in, you can go to, do this. It's really, it's really interesting. I mean, in the Olympics, Common Paris tried to get to the Olympics for 24. It didn't happen. They're going to do it anyways, alongside in an experimental way. But you think, you know, elementary school, high school, free rides to college, I mean, full scholarship programs around all this stuff. Olympics, the World Cup is already well established in this. Right, so this in the franchise, I mean, you know, this is really what traditional sports did. We just get, you know, we know that, and so we can kind of set it up accordingly, you know, having with that in mind, right? Yeah.
Just one question about, we get back to traditional sports again, and I mean, the majority, not the majority, I wouldn't say because I'm not a big football fan, but pretty big amount of football clubs are never profitable. They're more like, you know, the negative balance sheet. Formula One, majority are either sponsored or bankrupt, either bought by someone who's really rich or bankrupt. And take into account the numbers which you just said, which remind regarding the fact that in esports much more people are already engaged. Do you think that esports will have a brighter future in terms of the leagues and the teams than most of the other traditional sports?
Yeah, I think, I mean, look, I invested in traditional sports as well, right? I mean, there's different attributes, but you know, to your point on demographics, right, and the WNBA and so on, this is the only one expanding in that 1835, right? So, yeah, I think, you know, these things, it's not zero sum, right? These things can live alongside each other, but I think for sure, you know, there's a like a big future here, right? But I do think it matters the construct, right? These European football leagues you're referencing, right? They're not well set up. It's not the business is scattered because the framework is flawed. Okay, and we can talk about that. It's different, but this notion of you must win to participate, and you know, others playing for relegation and different. It's just not solid the way, you know, maybe some of these American leagues are more long term. And so, anyways, it goes back to the setup.
I'll be quite quick, but I think there's a big warning for the esports teams and in traditional sports. And if you look at why a lot of like soccer clubs are going bankrupt or in financial trouble if they don't have this, you know, billionaire investor, I think because they let player power get out of control and wages get out of control, and growth and winning became more important than managing your costs. So what you see with many examples, Leeds United, etc., that they are gambling to win something, so they're overpaying their players, they lose that bet, and then they spiral out of control. And I think that's a warning for the esports industry and clubs to not let the costs spiral out of control in that elusive goal of winning the title, because if you need to manage your risks as well.
Sure.
I want to thank you very much. It's amazing. We have one last question. And I go to a party mood.
We'll keep it short. Look, if you look at traditional sport, be it football, you see a lot of advertising coming from the online gambling, the betting industry. You see Bet365, 888. All this advertising is heavily entrenched in traditional sports, competitive sport. There seems to be a perception that esports is resisting the intrusion from the online gambling, from the betting industry. I have my own theory, which partly is due to the fact that the viewership of traditional sport, so the working class male who goes to the pub, has a pint, is very different from the audience of esports, which is typically more articulate, younger crowd. I stand to be corrected there, but this is the sort of demographic we're looking on the two fronts. But how real is the perception that the esports community is resisting online gambling or sports betting from creeping into the industry?
My opinion there is that that's a wrong perception. I think it's become, and maybe 5 years ago that was correct, it's become quite normal for gambling in esports, and I think the future for gambling companies is quite bright in esports, because when you're gambling to an online match, you can take advantage of that moment of being in the game. I think like Bet365, which is online only, have been probably the most successful gambling company out there, because they take advantage of 5 minutes to go, make a bet now, and putting the pressure on the person who's gambling to
in-play betting.
And with digital, with gaming, I think that can be played out even more than in traditional non-online.
But about gambling, it's true for
The mic.
So I mean, it's true that gambling companies are not really into franchise leagues but not because gamers are not betting. It's just because Riot, Blizzard is not really supported, I think. And you just double check the key sponsors of the CIS clubs. I mean, if you delete the bettors, they immediately like in a very red zone. So
Yeah, but let me just say one thing real quick. It's not this binary matter of are you supportive or not of this ecosystem, right? This is the very beginning of something very, that is competitively, we're still scanning for what's exactly the right format. From a competitive perspective, I just want to work. I mean, it's in that way, program is delicate, right? The integrity of this matters quite a bit. So everybody understands there's the opportunity, right, to engage with that and understands how it works in traditional sports. The question is, you do that when you're solid, right? It's a matter, it's time.
Mark is the last.
And another thing, Iman, I mean, obviously you know a lot about skill gaming. Skill gaming in the casual gaming space has been around for 15 years, right? And the rules are very clear, especially in the U.S. jurisdictions about, the line between gambling and skill gaming. So that makes sense. And in fact, skill gaming has been around quite a while in multiplayer games before they were called esports. There were a bunch of things. There were some issues with fraud. I think blockchain can kind of be a good counterbalance to that, so there's less fraud. But in any case, as the audience gets engaged, I think the engagement thing is going to be more interesting, right? When people are participating, when they're engaged, the laws are changing right now in the U.S. A lot of states are liberalizing laws, and as I think the U.S. is still a really large market. I would assume in Asia they're very different things. But then the perspective is, a lot of these publishers have strict kind of no-fly zones. No advertising of smoking, no advertising of gambling. Gambling is still seen kind of as quote-unquote sin sport in many markets. So it'll take time, but I think if you're on this side of skill, that's allowed, and there are a lot of these projects taking advantage of that.
Guys, thank you very much. Thank you for coming for 6 wave experiences. Panel. Now it's time for party. We gotta have a show.